Hello everybody and welcome back to a lecture series. I am Ted, your host, and for this lecture we're going to look at the Assyrians. And now the Assyrians, for most of antiquity, they were sort of periphery players, but they emerged after the Bronze Age collapse as the unlikely forerunners to contend for the overlordship of the Near East. They were always rather minor players. They had been known to the Sumerians and the Akkadians and the Elamites, and everybody has simply been able to defeat them, have been able to stifle their ambitions. With the collapse of the Bronze Age, all of the doors for empire building were removed. All of the barriers were removed for that sort of prevented the Assyrians from expanding and realizing what was at that point just centuries of ambition. Egypt by 1050 was in decline. Having lost her Levantine provinces, things were in a precarious state in the Nile. Had various succeeding military dynasties from the west. Dynasties 22 to 24 were basically Western or Libyan warlords who ruled from the Nile marshes. And these dynasties, these Libyan dynasties, they were hamstrung by the fact that Egypt had no iron deposits, nor did Egypt have easy access to iron. The lack of iron made the situation for the Egyptian rulers very precarious and removed them from serious contention from really trying to rebuild the great empire of the kings of the 18th dynasty in the Levantine shores, in the eastern shores of the Levant. In Mesopotamia, Babylon was divided between the this group that we should call native inhabitants. Basically, these would be Amorites slash Sumerians slash Akkadians, and a group of people known as the Chaldeans. And the Chaldeans were a group of Semitic speaking peoples who moved into the area and very quickly overlaid themselves at the new military elite in Mesopotamia. Babylon did also not have access to iron, and they were divided along the same lines as the Egyptians. You had these foreigners ruling over the native peoples, and there was a great deal of resentment there. Now, Assyria, the Assyrians were to their great benefit located next to great deposits of iron in the Zagros Mountains. They had the Zagros Mountains to the east, and they had the Armenian highlands neighboring them as well. And most importantly, the Assyrian kings had been pursuing a policy for the past few centuries, and this policy was really to gain control over both the upper Tigris and Euphrates rivers. It was a long-standing goal to drive west and to take the Al Jazeera, the grasslands of the ancient Near East. The grasslands right next to the rivers, I should say, and to continue on pushing west until they hit the Mediterranean Sea. And this was to secure the key ancient trade routes. This is harkening back to those earlier trade routes that was the focus of Hammurabi and, of course, the focus of Sargon. And this was pursued in order to get the wealthier cities of Mesopotamia to sort of follow Assyrian rule. Now, the Assyrian plan caused friction between not just Sumer and Akkad in Assyria, but later the Babylonians and the Assyrians. And this friction was there for centuries. And for centuries, nobody really gave the Assyrians paid them much mind, because Assyria was not really in a position to project itself in all these areas. The pushback from one area would be so great that it would absorb all their time, and the Assyrians would slowly but surely lose ground, and their ambitions would be stifled. This also sort of begins to explain why the Aramaeans, another desert Semitic-speaking peoples, while they were able to rise in prominence in the Near East, and while the Babylonians sort of favored them, the Aramaeans crossed the deserts. They used camel caravans to cross the deserts, and they bypassed the Assyrian lands altogether. So they sort of cut the Assyrians out of the equation. But in the wake of the Bronze Age collapse, the Assyrians were in a position to finally dictate the social, economic, and political destiny of the Near East. They were able to, they were in the position to finally impose their will on those coveted cities of Mesopotamia. And this was a galling thought to the Babylonians. The Babylonians thought of themselves as the true heirs to the Sumerians, that Babylon was viewed by them as the heir to Ur. The Babylonians viewed themselves as, the Babylonian kings viewed themselves as the heirs of Ur-Nammu and Shulgi, and they viewed themselves as the heir to the Akkadians, to the city of Asargade, and of course to the line of Sargon. And then this extends back from the time of Hammurabi into the present of the Bronze Age collapse. And then they viewed the Assyrians as interlopers, as border peoples who did a poor job. Backwater rubes had a poor job, who did a poor job of imitating them. They would not brook Assyrian ambitions. They would, from the get-go, attempt to stifle all that Assyria attempted to do. And in the age of Assyrian hegemony, it would be the Babylonians, the Amorites, the Amurru, who would repeatedly launch rebellion after rebellion. They would continually conspire to overthrow the Assyrians, and but there was nothing really they could do to stop it. Assyria had all the ingredients needed to be a great power of the Near East. She had access to iron, vast quantities of iron. She already controlled the northern trade routes and had access to bellical tribal people that the Assyrians were more than willing to incorporate into their army and incorporate their traditions into their army, into their military practice. Now, the Aramaeans, the Assyrians also brought in Aramaeans, and this sort of propelled Assyria into the forefront of the economic range of these regions, because even though the Babylonians don't want to incorporate those northern trade routes, the Aramaeans do want to exploit those northern trade routes. They want to increase their economic productivity, their economic vitality. Now, the Assyrians, they were also quite good at assimilating peoples into greater Assyria. And our records indicate that there was no great emphasis on ethnicity within Assyria. That is, being someone born in Assyrian domains to two parents who were both Assyrian, who were both ethnic Assyrians, does not really come into to play. Assyria was, to the people living there and to their elites, a political designation, not an ethnic designation. Assyria was simply the realm. And anybody who came in and fought for the army, anybody who was loyal to the state or loyal in royal service, could then lay claim to being an Assyrian. Now, the Assyrians also enjoyed a long succession of able monarchs who were able to develop a royal bureaucracy and able to create traditions for the Assyrian state. And this began with the king Ashur-uballit I, who shook off the Mitanni in the wake of the Hittite victories in northern Mesopotamia. And he took the title Lord of the Universe. He took a title that dated all the way back to the reign of Sargon of Akkad. Ashur-uballit I set the tone for the future Assyrian kings to see themselves as the heir of the Akkadians and the Sumerians. And again, this put them on course for collision with the Babylonians, because now both people are remembering way back to this tradition. Both people are laying claim to being the heirs to this tradition. Now, the successors of Ashur-uballit were able to consolidate Assyrian control over the northern Mesopotamia, and they threatened both the Egyptians and the Hittites, though not very successfully. But I do want to highlight this: when Ramses II and Hattusilus III, when they signed their peace treaty back in 1257 BCE, it was to settle things in the Levant, not because they, decided to just be buddies or good friends or anything like that, but they were seeing the growing threat of Assyria, and they decided to put aside their differences with one another to band together to stifle Assyrian ambitions as far as pushing west and invading the eastern shores of the Mediterranean. That treaty was a mutually was a mutual defense treaty in many ways against future Assyrian assaults. Now, during the reign of Tukulti-Ninurta I, the Assyrians succeeded in capturing the city of Babylon, and they broke Kassite power back in 1230 BCE. Now, Tukulti-Ninurta I briefly succeeded in fulfilling the ambitions of all Assyrian kings, that is, the unification of all of Mesopotamia under Assyrian hegemony, and this hegemony will be centered on the city of Ashur, the ancient capital of the Assyrians. Now, Tukulti-Ninurta I, he had to relinquish his hegemony. He had to relinquish his conquest because he could not hold Babylon. At this point, the Assyrian state did not have the tools at their disposal. They did not have the royal institutions or the bureaucratic capabilities to hold on to Babylon. It was just too far. It was just too difficult. And the successors of Tukulti-Ninurta I had to contend with the arrival of new peoples in the Near East. The ancestors of the Persians and the Medes came in. There was a reconfiguration in Asia Minor with the Phrygians, the Sea Peoples attack on Egypt. The Chaldeans move into southern Mesopotamia. The Levantine shores sort of undergo a new radical shift in the balance of power there. The entire balance of power, the entire geopolitical scene of the Near East is radically remade with the migration of new peoples and with the breakdown of the organized states following the Bronze Age collapse. And for the next few centuries, the Assyrian kings were then put forced into the position, I should say, to where they had to forge the discipline and develop the tactics that they would use to unite the Near East, to conquer the Near East. Among these were learning iron smelting and developing new uses for iron. And we will break here. That will complete our sort of run up on Assyria. There's a lot more to be said about Assyria. We haven't even gotten to like Imperial Assyria, but that's discussed in our lecture proper on Assyria. As always, hit like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know what you thought about this fact regarding the Assyrians. And as always, I'm Ted, and I'll see you guys next time for another fast fact.